Welcome back to Dr. Harmony. They say that the sharpest blade is the one held by the hand you once taught to hold a spoon. Today's story isn't just about a loss of money or a roof over one's head. It's about the ultimate betrayal of the bloodline. Imagine turning 70, expecting a celebration of a life well lived, only to find that the person you loved most has been planning your demise for years. This is a journey through the shadows of a family's greed, and a reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear aren't under our beds. They are the ones we raised with our own two hands. Stay with us as we unravel this heartbreaking tale of a father's 70th birthday that turned into his living nightmare. The morning of my 70th birthday began with a silence that felt heavy, yet strangely expectant. I sat on the edge of my bed, the mahogany frame creaking slightly. A bed I had shared with my late wife for 40 years in a house I had built with my own sweat and labor. Outside the window, the garden was bathed in the soft golden light of dawn. I had spent decades tending to those roses, much like I had spent decades tending to my son, Julian. I smiled to myself, thinking of how far he had come. He was a successful businessman now, sharp-suited and fast-talking, a far cry from the scraped-kneed boy who used to hide behind my legs when guests arrived. "Happy birthday, Dad," Julian's voice boomed from the hallway before he even entered the room. He walked in, smelling of expensive cologne and ambition. He didn't hug me. Julian hadn't been a hugger for a long time, but he patted my shoulder with a firmness that felt almost possessive. 70 years. A milestone. I've got a big surprise for you today. Something you'll never forget. I laughed, a dry, dusty sound. At my age, Julian, a quiet lunch is a surprise enough. You didn't have to do anything grand. "Oh, but I did," he said, his eyes scanning the room, lingering on the antique dresser and the safe hidden behind the painting of the countryside. "You've worked hard, Dad. You've accumulated so much. It's time you were relieved of all those burdens. I've arranged everything. Just wait until the party tonight." The day passed in a blur of strange errands. Julian had asked me to sign a few final retirement papers earlier that week, claiming they were just formalities to ensure my healthcare and pension were streamlined. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my flesh and blood, the legacy of my name. I signed where he pointed, squinting through my spectacles, trusting the son I had put through the best universities. I didn't realize I was signing away the ground I stood on. By 6 p.m., the house was strangely empty. There were no caterers, no relatives, no old friends from the shipyard. Just Julian standing in the foyer and two men I didn't recognize standing by the door. They weren't dressed for a party. They were wearing work jumpsuits. "Julian, where is everyone?" I asked, coming down the stairs in my best suit, the one I saved for weddings and funerals. My heart began to thud in a slow, rhythmic warning. "The party starts at 6, doesn't it?" Julian turned to me. The warmth he had faked that morning was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical efficiency. He looked at his watch, then at the men. "The surprise, Dad. It's time for your gift." He gestured to the men, who disappeared upstairs. I heard the sound of drawers being pulled out, the thud of heavy objects hitting the floor. "What are they doing up there? Julian, answer me!" He walked toward me, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor I had polished myself for 30 years. "You've always said this house was too big for one person, Dad. You said it was a burden, to keep it clean, to pay the taxes, to manage the upkeep. So I took your advice. I took the burden away." "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my knees beginning to tremble. "The papers you signed on Monday weren't for your pension," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any melody of affection. "They were the deed transfers. This house, the warehouse, the investment accounts, they're all in my name now. And since I've decided to sell the property to a developer who starts renovations tomorrow morning, you can't stay here." I felt the air leave my lungs as if I had been punched. "Sell. This is my home. Your mother's spirit is in these walls." "Mother is dead and these walls are just equity," Julian snapped. At that moment, the two men returned. They weren't carrying trays of food or gifts. They were carrying 4 battered suitcases, the ones I kept in the attic. My clothes were hanging out of the zippers, shoved in with no care. Julian took one of the suitcases and walked toward the front door. "I told you it would be a surprise. I've even called a car for you. It'll take you to the shelter across town. They have a bed waiting." He opened the heavy oak door. The night air was cold, a harsh contrast to the warmth of the hallway. Before I could find my voice, before I could scream or weep, he took my arm. It wasn't the supportive grip of a son. It was the grip of a bouncer ejecting a drunk from a club. He shoved me toward the threshold. "Wait, Julian, please," I stumbled. He didn't wait. He picked up the suitcases one by one and hurled them onto the pavement. The sound of my life, my books, my medals, my memories hitting the wet asphalt echoed through the quiet neighborhood. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, old man," Julian said, his face a mask of stone. "You're 70. You've had your time. Now it's mine." With a final violent shove, he pushed me out into the dark. The door I had opened for him every day of his childhood, slammed shut with a finality that sounded like a coffin closing. I stood there, 70 years old in my best suit, surrounded by my belongings on the street as the rain began to fall. The rain wasn't heavy, but it was persistent. A cold drizzle that soaked through the fabric of my suit and chilled me to the bone. I stood there, staring at the closed door of my own home, waiting for it to swing open. I waited for Julian to laugh, to come out and tell me this was some twisted, dark joke. I waited for him to say, "Got you, Dad," and pull me back into the warmth. But the house remained silent, its windows like blind eyes staring past me. The golden light from the foyer was extinguished, leaving only the dim glow of the street lamp to illuminate my humiliation. I looked down at my suitcases. One of them had burst open upon impact. My favorite sweater, the one my wife, Martha, had knitted for me the winter before she passed, lay in a puddle, absorbing the oily water of the gutter. I knelt down, my joints popping painfully to gather it. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely grip the wool. This was the boy I had stayed up with when he had fevers. This was the man whose college tuition had cost me my retirement savings, a sacrifice I made gladly because I believed in his future. "Julian!" I cried out, my voice cracking. I hammered my fist against the oak door. "Julian, open this door! You can't do this! I have nowhere to go!" There was no response. Instead, I heard the muffled sound of the security bolts sliding into place. My own son was locking me out of the fortress I had built for him. A car pulled up to the curb, a cheap, rusted taxi. The driver rolled down the window, looking at me with a mix of pity and impatience. "You the one going to the mission on 4th Street?" the driver asked. "The fare's been prepaid by a Mr. Julian." The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on my chest until it was hard to breathe. He hadn't just thrown me out. He had scheduled my disposal like a trash pickup. I looked at the taxi, then back at the house. I thought of the safe inside, the one containing Martha's jewelry, and the letters we wrote to each other during the war. Everything was gone. In the eyes of the law, I had signed it all away. I was a guest in my own life, and my reservation had been canceled. I didn't get into the taxi. I couldn't. To step into that car was to accept that I was now a homeless man at 70 years old. I began to drag my suitcases down the driveway. The wheels of the luggage screamed against the pavement, a harsh, grating sound that felt like it was tearing through my heart. I walked aimlessly, the weight of the bags pulling at my shoulders. Neighbors I had known for 30 years peered through their curtains. I saw Mrs. Gable from next door pull her blinds shut when our eyes met. Nobody wanted to get involved in a family dispute, even if that dispute was a slow-motion execution of a father's dignity. By the time I reached the end of the block, my breath was coming in ragged gasps. I sat down on one of the suitcases, my head in my hands. How had I missed the signs? I began to retrace the last few months. Julian had been so attentive lately. He had started bringing me dinner, asking about my health and talking about simplifying my estate. He told me that with the rise in property crimes, it wasn't safe for an old man to have so many assets in his own name. "I'll protect you, Dad," he had said, pouring me a glass of wine. "I'll handle the taxes, the lawyers, the headaches. You just enjoy your sunset years." I had felt so proud of him. I thought he was finally showing the maturity and love I had prayed for. I remembered the day at the lawyer's office. Julian's lawyer, not mine. The room had been cold, filled with the smell of old paper and expensive leather. Julian had flipped through the pages quickly, pointing where I should sign. "Just a formality, Dad. This ensures that if anything happens to you, the state can't touch the house. It keeps everything in the family." I had trusted him because he was the family. I didn't read the fine print that stripped me of my life estate. I didn't see the clause that allowed the new owner, him, to evict any occupants at will. I was a victim of my own love, blinded by the hope that my son finally cared for me. The rain turned into a steady pour. I realized I was shivering uncontrollably. My suit was ruined and my shoes were waterlogged. I looked at my reflection in a shop window as I passed the local commercial strip. I didn't recognize the old man looking back. His hair was a mess of silver, his face was lined with a lifetime of work, and his eyes were hollow with a shock that transcended grief. I reached into my pocket, hoping I had my cell phone. It was there, but when I tried to turn it on, the screen remained black. Julian had deactivated the family plan. He had severed my connection to the world. I was truly alone. I found a small bus stop bench with a narrow overhang that offered a meager shelter from the rain. I sat there, clutching my bags, watching the cars splash by. Each pair of headlights felt like a mocking eye. People were going home, to dinner, to warmth, to families who loved them. I was 70 today. I was supposed to be cutting a cake. I was supposed to be surrounded by laughter. Instead, I was listening to the sound of the city at night, wondering if I would survive until morning. The betrayal stung more than the cold. It was a poison that seeped into my memories, tainting every birthday, every holiday, and every "I love you" Julian had ever said. Was it all a long con? Had he been waiting for this moment since the day he realized I had something worth taking? As the hours crawled by, the physical pain in my back and legs became a dull roar. But deeper than that was the burning fire of a realization. My son hadn't just stolen my house. He had stolen my identity. Without that home, without that role as the patriarch, who was I? I was just a ghost haunting the streets of a city that had no room for the elderly. I looked at the dark sky and whispered Martha's name. I asked her for forgiveness for being so foolish. And then, for the first time in 40 years, I felt a flicker of something other than sadness. It was a cold, sharp spark of anger. Julian thought I was a broken old man. He thought I would simply fade away into the shadows of a state-run facility. He forgot one thing. I was the one who taught him how to fight. I just never thought I'd have to use those lessons against him. The bus stop offered no warmth, only a temporary reprieve from the soaking rain. By midnight, my pride was finally crushed by the sheer physical need for survival. My bones felt like brittle glass, and the shivering had become so intense that I could barely keep my balance. I looked at the slip of paper the taxi driver had tried to give me, the address of the St. Jude's mission. With a heavy heart and dragging my sodden suitcases, I began the long trek toward the only place left for me. The shelter was a stark brick building that smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed despair. As I pushed through the heavy doors, I was met by a line of men who looked much like I felt, hollowed out. A young woman with tired eyes behind a plexiglass shield looked at me. She didn't see a father, a retired engineer, or a man of dignity. She saw another number. "Name?" she asked, her pen hovering over a clipboard. Arthur Bennett," I stammered, my voice sounding like sandpaper. "Date of birth?" "Today," I whispered. "I mean, January 30th. I'm 70 today." She paused for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine pity crossing her face before she masked it with the professionalism of the overworked. "Happy birthday, Mr. Bennett. We have one cot left in the general ward. Put your valuables in this locker. We aren't responsible for theft." I looked at my suitcases. Valuables? My life was in those bags, but as I looked around at the desperate faces in the lobby, I realized valuables here meant a pair of dry socks or a piece of bread. I took my wallet, empty of cash, as Julian had drained the joint accounts, and my wife's small locket, which I had tucked into my vest pocket. Everything else was locked away in a metal box that smelled of rust. The ward was a sea of metal cots, spaced barely a foot apart. The air was thick with the sounds of coughing, snoring, and the low rhythmic moans of people dreaming of better lives. I lay down on the thin, plastic-covered mattress. It was cold and hard, a cruel mockery of the orthopedic bed I had bought just last year. I stared at the ceiling where a single water stain looked vaguely like a map of a country I no longer recognized. "First time?" The voice came from the cot to my left. I turned my head to see an older man, perhaps a few years younger than me, with a thick gray beard and eyes that were incredibly sharp. He was propped up on one elbow, watching me. "Is it that obvious?" I asked. "You're wearing a three-piece suit in a homeless shelter, brother. Either you're a very lost billionaire, or you got blindsided by someone you trusted." I let out a shaky breath. "My son. He took the house. He took everything." The man nodded, showing no surprise. "The family transfer special. I'm Silas. I was a lawyer once, before the whiskey took my nerves and my partner took my firm. But I've seen your story 100 times. The kid plays the long game, waits for the milestone birthday, and strikes while the old man is feeling sentimental." "I signed the papers," I said, the guilt washing over me. I didn't even read them properly. I trusted him. Silas sat up, his expression hardening. "Trust is a luxury the poor can't afford, Arthur. But listen to me. Being old doesn't mean you're dead." Julian. That's his name, right? He thinks you're a ghost now. He thinks the system will swallow you whole, and you'll be gone in 6 months. That's how they win. They bank on your shame keeping you quiet. "I am ashamed," I admitted, tears finally stinging my eyes. "I'm ashamed that I raised a monster. I'm ashamed that I'm 70 years old and I have to ask permission to go to the bathroom." "Don't be," Silas said, leaning closer. "The shame belongs to him. He's the one who violated the most basic law of humanity. You're just a man who loved his son too much. That's a mistake, sure, but it's not a sin." I looked at Silas. He had nothing, just a small backpack and a tattered book. Yet he spoke with a clarity that gave me a strange sense of grounding. "What do I do? He has the deed. He has the accounts. I don't even have a phone." "Tonight you sleep," Silas commanded. "Tomorrow we walk. I know a few people who still owe me favors. People who haven't forgotten what it's like to be human. Julian thinks he's playing a game of checkers, but he's forgotten that you're the one who taught him the rules. We need to find the cracks in those papers you signed. No contract is airtight if it was built on a foundation of fraud." "He said it was legal," I whispered. "Legal and lawful are two different things in the hands of a snake," Silas replied. He reached out and patted my arm. "Rest, Arthur. You're going to need your strength. Tomorrow we start the process of haunting your son." I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I drifted off, I saw Julian's face. Not the face of the man who had thrown me out, but the face of the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders at the beach. I remembered the way he used to hold my hand when he was scared of the dark. How did that boy become the man who threw his father into the rain? As the sun began to peek through the high, barred windows of the shelter, a grim resolve began to settle in my gut. Silas was right. Julian was counting on my grief to paralyze me. He expected me to sit in this ward and wait for the end. But as I watched the other men begin to stir, I realized that I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for the truth of my life. I wouldn't let my story end on a wet sidewalk. If Julian wanted a war, he had forgotten that I was a man who had survived 70 years of storms. This was just one more. The morning light in the shelter was unforgiving. It stripped away the shadows that had hidden the grime of the walls and the exhaustion on the faces of the men around me. Silas was already awake, sitting on the edge of his cot and meticulously folding a thin wool blanket. He looked at me and nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the battle had begun. We shared a breakfast of watery oatmeal and bitter coffee, served in plastic bowls by volunteers who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. "Listen to me carefully, Arthur," Silas said, leaning in across the communal table. "To win a fight against a man like Julian, you have to stop thinking like a father and start thinking like a predator. He used your emotions as a weapon. Now, we use his arrogance against him. He thinks you're too broken to fight back. That's his first mistake. I don't even have a copy of the papers I signed," I lamented, rubbing my aching temples. "He kept everything. He said he was putting them in a safe place for me." "And he did," Silas chuckled darkly. "He put them in his safe, but every legal document leaves a trail. If he transferred the deed, it has to be recorded at the county clerk's office. If he emptied your bank accounts, there are digital footprints. We're going to spend the day at the public library. It's warm, it's free, and it has the internet." The walk to the library felt like a trek across a foreign land. I was still wearing my suit, now wrinkled and stained, and I could feel the judgmental stares of the morning commuters. They saw a vagrant. I felt like a ghost. When we arrived at the library, Silas led me to the computer terminals with the confidence of a man who spent much of his time in these hallowed halls of information. For hours we dug. Silas showed me how to access public property records. My heart hammered against my ribs when I saw my home address pop up on the screen. There it was, transfer of ownership, dated 3 days ago. The grantor was Arthur Bennett. The grantee was Julian Bennett. The consideration listed was $10 and love and affection. "Love and affection," I whispered, the irony tasting like bile. He wrote that on the legal document while he was planning to throw me out. "Wait," Silas said, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the digital scan of the filing. "Look at the notary stamp. Does that name look familiar to you, Sarah Jenkins?" I squinted at the screen. "Sarah? That's Julian's executive assistant. She's worked for him for 5 years. She's like family. She used to bring me birthday cards." Silas leaned back, a predatory smile playing on his lips. "A notary is supposed to be an impartial witness. If she's his employee, and she notarized a document where her boss is the sole beneficiary, that's a conflict of interest. But more importantly, did she actually see you sign this, Arthur? Were you in her presence at the office?" I thought back to that afternoon. "No, Julian brought the papers to my house. He said he'd take them to the office to get them stamped and finalized to save me the trip. I signed them on my kitchen table while we were having tea." Silas slapped the desk, earning a sharp shh from the librarian. "That's it. That's the crack in the foundation. A notary must witness the signature in person. If she signed that stamp later at the office, she committed notary fraud. And if we can prove she did it at Julian's direction, that's a conspiracy to commit deed fraud. The whole transfer becomes voidable." A spark of hope, small but fierce, ignited in my chest. But it's his word against mine. Who will believe a homeless man over a successful CEO? "We need proof," Silas said, "and I think I know where to find it. We need to go back to your neighborhood. Not to the house, but to the neighbors. Did anyone see Julian coming and going that day? Did anyone see that he was alone when he brought those papers?" We took a bus back to the suburbs. As the familiar trees and fences rolled by, a sense of dread washed over me. This was the place where I had raised my son, where I had buried my wife's ashes under the oak tree in the backyard. To return as an outcast felt like a second eviction. We stepped off the bus 2 blocks away to avoid being seen by Julian. I led Silas through the back alleyways I knew so well. We stopped behind the Gable house. Mrs. Gable was a notorious gossip, but she also had a high-tech doorbell camera she had installed after a string of porch piracies. I knocked on her back door. When she opened it, she gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Arthur, my heavens, look at you. We heard. Julian told us you had a mental breakdown and had to be taken to a specialized facility for your own safety." "A mental breakdown?" I choked out. "Is that what he told you?" "He said you were becoming aggressive," she whispered, looking at Silas with suspicion. "He said you were selling off the furniture to strangers and that he had to intervene to save the family legacy." "It's a lie, Evelyn," I said, my voice steadying. "He threw me out on my birthday. I spent the night in a shelter. I need your help. Do you remember last Monday? The day Julian came over for tea? Did your camera catch him arriving?" She hesitated, her loyalty to the neighborhood peace warring with her conscience. She looked at my ruined suit and the desperation in my eyes. "He was always a cold boy, that Julian," she muttered. "Come in, Arthur. Let's look at the footage." We sat in her kitchen as she pulled up the app on her tablet. We scrolled back to Monday at 2 p.m. There was Julian's sleek black sedan pulling into my driveway. He got out alone. He was carrying a blue folder. He stayed for 40 minutes, then walked back out, still alone, tucked the folder under his arm, and drove away. Sarah Jenkins was nowhere to be found. "Can you give me a copy of this?" I asked. "I'll email it to you," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Arthur, I'm so sorry. I should have checked on you." "Don't be sorry, Evelyn," I said, looking at Silas, who was already nodding. "Be a witness." As we left her house, Silas turned to me. "We have the footage. We have the proof of the improper notarization. But Julian is fast. If he sells that house to a bona fide purchaser who doesn't know about the fraud, getting it back becomes a nightmare. We need to move tonight." "What do we do?" "We stop being the victims," Silas said. "We're going to pay a visit to Sarah Jenkins. She's the weak link. Julian uses people, Arthur. I bet you anything she's scared of him. If we show her that footage and talk about jail time, she'll crumble like a dry cracker." I looked back at my house in the distance. I saw a for sale sign being hammered into the front lawn by a contractor. My heart tightened. Julian wasn't just moving on, he was erasing me. But as I turned away, I didn't feel like the broken man from the night before. I felt like a father who had one final difficult lesson to teach his son. The office of Jenkins and Associates was a sterile environment of glass and polished chrome, a place where paperwork turned into power. Silas and I sat in a small coffee shop across the street, watching the employees trickle out as the sun began to dip below the horizon. We were looking for one person, Sarah Jenkins. In my former life, I had treated Sarah like a niece. I had bought her flowers when she passed her notary exam. I had listened to her talk about her struggles as a single mother. Now, she was the primary witness to the theft of my life. "There she is," Silas whispered, pointing to a woman walking toward the parking garage. She looked frazzled, clutching her handbag tightly, her eyes darting around as if she expected a blow to fall. She didn't look like a criminal mastermind. She looked like someone trapped in a cage of her own making. We intercepted her just as she reached her car. When she saw me, her face went white, a ghostly pallor that told me everything I needed to know. She dropped her keys, the metal jingling against the concrete like a funeral knell. "Arthur?" she gasped, her voice trembling. "Julian! Julian said you were in a private hospital. He said you were being cared for." "Do I look like I'm being cared for, Sarah?" I asked, gesturing to my stained clothes and the hollow circles under my eyes. "I spent my 70th birthday on a sidewalk. I spent last night on a plastic cot in a homeless shelter. Is that the care you helped him arrange?" I didn't know," she sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand. "He told me it was just a technicality. He said you wanted him to have the house, so you wouldn't have to worry about the bills. He said you were there when I stamped it, that you just stepped out for a moment." Silas stepped forward, his voice low and authoritative, the lawyer in him rising from the ashes of his past. "Sarah, my name is Silas. I'm representing Mr. Bennett. We have doorbell footage from the neighborhood showing Julian arriving and leaving his father's house alone on the day of the signing. You weren't there. You notarized a forged or fraudulently obtained deed. That is a felony, Sarah. You'll lose your license, your job, and quite possibly your freedom." "He forced me," she wailed, leaning against her car for support. "He told me if I didn't do it, he'd find a reason to fire me. I have a son, Arthur. He's only 6. I couldn't lose my health insurance." The mention of her son hit me like a physical blow. Julian had used her love for her child to destroy his own father. The depravity of his plan was deeper than I had imagined. He hadn't just been greedy, he had been calculated, finding the exact pressure points of everyone around him. "I don't want to see you in prison, Sarah," I said softly, stepping closer. "But I need the truth. I need to know what else he did. It wasn't just the house, was it?" Sarah looked around nervously, then beckoned us into her car. Once the doors were locked, she began to unravel the full extent of Julian's betrayal. "It's worse than you think, Arthur. He didn't just take the house. He's been diverting funds from your retirement accounts for over a year. He set up a shell company called Apex Heritage Holdings. Every time you thought you were signing a medical form or a tax document, you were actually authorizing a transfer to that company." "How much?" Silas asked. "Everything," she whispered. "The liquid assets, the stocks your wife left you, the emergency savings. He's been liquidating them and moving the money offshore. He's planning to file for bankruptcy for his main business next month to hide the trail. He's stripping you bare so that even if you sued him, there would be nothing left to recover." I felt a cold numbness spreading through my limbs. My son hadn't just wanted a bigger house. He had wanted to erase my existence, to ensure I had no resources to fight back, no way to survive. It was a total erasure of a human being. "But why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "I would have given him everything anyway. He was my heir. Why do it this way?" Sarah looked at me with deep pity. "Because he's in debt, Arthur. Deep debt. He got involved with some very dangerous people in the private equity world. He lost millions of the firm's money, and he was terrified of going to jail for embezzlement. He saw your estate as his get-out-of-jail-free card. He didn't see you as a father anymore. He saw you as a bank account that was taking too long to pay out." The truth was a bitter pill. My son wasn't a mastermind. He was a coward. He had destroyed my life to cover up his own failures. "I have the files," Sarah said suddenly, her resolve hardening. "I kept copies. I knew what we were doing was wrong, and I kept a digital folder of every document Julian forced me to falsify. I was too scared to go to the police, but I couldn't just let it go. I have the proof of the offshore transfers and the original unnotarized deeds." Silas looked at me, a grim smile on his face. "This is the smoking gun, Arthur. With this, we don't just get your house back. We can put him away." "I don't know if I can do that," I whispered. "He's my son." "He stopped being your son the moment he napped you and threw you into the rain, Arthur," Silas said firmly. "He chose this path. Now you have to choose yours. Do you want to die in a shelter, or do you want to show him what a father's justice looks like?" I looked at Sarah, who was holding out a small USB drive. It was a tiny piece of plastic, but it held the weight of my entire life. I thought of the rain on my birthday. I thought of the way Julian had looked at me, like I was a piece of trash to be discarded. I took the drive from her hand. My fingers were no longer shaking. "Where do we go next, Silas?" "We go to the one person Julian is truly afraid of," Silas replied. "The district attorney. I happen to know she has a very soft spot for cases of elder abuse. And Arthur, get ready, because tomorrow we're going to give your son a birthday gift he'll never forget." As we drove away from the parking garage, I looked at the city skyline. Somewhere up there, in a penthouse built on lies, Julian was probably celebrating his victory. He thought he had won. He thought 70 was the age of surrender. He was about to find out that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous opponent of all. The district attorney's office was a hive of activity, a labyrinth of buzzing fluorescent lights and stacks of case files that seemed to hold the city's collective sorrow. Silas navigated the hallways with a ghost-like familiarity, his chin held higher than it had been in the shelter. We were here to see Diane Sterling, a woman Silas described as a pit bull in a silk scarf. When we were finally ushered into her office, Diane didn't look up from her desk immediately. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, perceptive eyes that seemed to weigh the soul of anyone who entered. When she finally looked at me, still in my rumpled suit, looking every bit the 70-year-old man who had been discarded, her expression didn't soften into pity. It hardened into a professional, focused intensity. "Silas," she said, her voice like gravel and honey. "I heard you were out of the game. What brings you to my door with a man who looks like he's walked through a war zone?" "He has, Diane," Silas said, placing the USB drive Sarah had given us on her desk. "This is Arthur Bennett. On his 70th birthday, his son, Julian Bennett, CEO of Bennett Acquisitions, threw him into the street. But before he did, he systematically stripped Arthur of every asset he owned through fraud, forgery, and the coercion of a notary public." Diane picked up the drive, turning it over in her fingers. "Elder abuse is a priority for this office. You know that. But fraud is a hard word to prove when there are signed documents involved. Most of these cases end up being civil disputes that drag on for years while the victim wastes away." "Not this time," I said, speaking up for the first time. My voice was steady, fueled by the cold fire that had replaced my grief. The documents were notarized by an employee who wasn't present. The funds were moved to a shell company to hide them from creditors. And my son is selling my home as we speak to launder the equity. If you don't act now, the trail goes cold, and I become a ward of the state." Diane looked at me for a long beat, then plugged the drive into her computer. The room went silent, save for the rhythmic clicking of her mouse. As she scrolled through the files, the emails between Julian and his creditors, the logs of the offshore transfers, and the video footage from Mrs. Gable's doorbell, her jaw tightened. "This isn't just greed," she whispered, staring at the screen. "This is predatory. He didn't just want the money. He wanted to ensure you had no way to fight back. He even deactivated your phone and canceled your insurance. He was waiting for you to disappear." "He's selling the house tomorrow morning," Silas added. "The closing is at 10 a.m. Once that deed is recorded to a third party, clawing it back becomes a legal nightmare." Diane picked up her desk phone. "Get me a judge on the line. I need an emergency ex parte injunction to freeze the title on the Bennett property. And I want a warrant for the arrest of Julian Bennett and Sarah Jenkins. Charge her with notary fraud, but tell her the DA is willing to talk about immunity if she turns state's evidence within the hour." She hung up and looked at me. "Mr. Bennett, the law moves slowly, but when it moves, it's a sledgehammer. We can stop the sale. We can freeze the accounts. But Julian is likely to flee if he catches wind of this." "Do you know where he is right now?" "He's at the house," I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. "He's hosting a property farewell dinner tonight for his investors. He's celebrating the sale of my life." "Good," Diane said, a predatory glint in her eyes. "Let him celebrate. We'll be there to crash the party." As we left the office, Silas turned to me. "It's happening, Arthur, but you need to be prepared. Seeing him in handcuffs, it's not going to feel the way you think it will. There's no joy in seeing your own blood destroyed. even if he deserves it. I don't want joy, Silas, I replied. I want my life back. I want the house where Martha's memory lives. I want the chair where I read stories to a boy who I thought loved me. Julian destroyed the son I knew a long time ago. The man in that house now is just a stranger who stole my coat. We spent the afternoon in a small motel room that Diane's office had arranged for us. I took a long, hot shower, washing away the smell of the shelter and the rain. Silas went out and bought me a fresh shirt and a pair of slacks. As I looked in the mirror, I saw the man I used to be, but with a new, harder edge. The gentleness of 70 years had been stripped away, leaving only the bedrock of cerebral. As evening fell, we drove back to my neighborhood in an unmarked police vehicle, following 2 squad cars. The streets were quiet, the lawns perfectly manicured, a facade of suburban peace that hid the rot within. As we approached my house, I saw the lights blazing. Expensive cars lined the curb. I could hear the faint sound of music and laughter spilling out into the night air. The sound of my son spending the money he had stolen from my sweat and tears. The police sergeant, a man named Miller, turned to me. "We're going in now, Mr. Bennett. We'd prefer you stay in the car for your own safety." "No," I said, my hand already on the door handle. He threw me out of that door in the dark. I want to be the first thing he sees when the light comes back on. Miller hesitated, then nodded. "Stay behind us. Once we secure the scene, you can have your word." I stepped out of the car. The cool night air felt different now. It wasn't a shroud. It was a beckoning. I walked up the driveway, passing the spot where my suitcases had been thrown just 24 hours ago. The door was unlocked. The police kicked it open with a thunderous crash that silenced the music and the laughter instantly. "Police, nobody move!" I walked through the door, stepping over the threshold of my own home. There, in the center of the living room, holding a crystal glass of my finest scotch, was Julian. He looked at the officers in shock, his face turning a shade of gray that matched the walls. But then his eyes shifted to me, standing behind the shield of the law. The glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking with a sudden sharp terror. "Happy birthday, Julian," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. "I told you I'd never forget this surprise." The silence in the room was suffocating. The air, once filled with the aroma of expensive catering and the tinkling of ice in crystal, now smelled of spilled scotch and cold fear. Julian stood frozen, his eyes darting from the uniformed officers to the handcuffs on Sergeant Miller's belt, and finally to me. The guests, investors in silk ties and women in cocktail dresses, shrank back against the walls, their faces masks of confusion and scandal. They looked at Julian, then at the disheveled old man in the doorway, and the realization began to dawn on them. "Dad, what is this?" Julian finally managed to stammer, his voice thin and reedy. "There's been a mistake. These officers, they shouldn't be here. I told you, you're not well. You should be in the clinic." "The only mistake I made, Julian, was believing you had a soul," I said, stepping further into the room, my feet crunching on the shards of the broken glass he had dropped. I looked around at the furniture, the sofa where I'd sat with his mother, the piano he'd learned to play on. All of it now felt like a crime scene. "I'm not in a clinic. I'm right here, and I've brought the truth with me." Sergeant Miller stepped forward, his hand resting on his holster. "Julian Bennett, you are under arrest for first-degree grand theft, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy to commit deed fraud. You have the right to remain silent." "Wait! No!" Julian shouted, his poise finally shattering. He held up his hands as if to ward off the words. "This is a civil matter. It's an inheritance issue. My father signed those papers voluntarily. He's 70, he's confused, he's not fit to manage his affairs." "I may be 70," I replied, my voice booming with a strength that surprised even me. "But I am not confused. I know exactly what you did. I know about Apex Heritage Holdings. I know about the offshore accounts. And I know about Sarah Jenkins." The mention of his assistant's name was the killing blow. Julian's face drained of the last vestige of color. He collapsed into the armchair, my armchair, his body suddenly looking small and defeated. The arrogance that had fueled him for years evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, cornered animal. "Clear the room," Miller ordered the guests. They didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled for the exit, avoiding my gaze, their friendship with Julian vanishing the moment the handcuffs came out. As the room emptied, Julian looked up at me. The tears in his eyes weren't of remorse. They were the tears of a man who had lost his leverage. "Dad, please, you don't understand. I was in trouble. I was going to lose everything. The firm, they were going to come after me. I just needed a loan. I was going to pay it back once the property deal closed." "A loan?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. "You threw me into the rain, Julian. You napped my suitcases and threw them into the gutter. You canceled my phone. You wanted me to disappear so I wouldn't be a witness to your theft. Was that part of the loan too?" "I had to make it look real," he pleaded, leaning forward. "If you were still here, the creditors would have asked questions. I was trying to save the family name. If I go to jail, the Bennett name is ruined. Is that what you want? To destroy your own legacy?" I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the greed, the weakness, and the utter lack of empathy. I realized then that I hadn't raised a monster. Julian had chosen this. He had taken the values I taught him, hard work, integrity, love, and twisted them into tools for manipulation. "The legacy isn't the name, Julian," I said softly. "The legacy is the man, and you are no man of mine." "Dad, listen to me," he hissed, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper as Miller moved in to secure his hands. "I still have the money, most of it. If you drop the charges, if you tell them you gave me permission, I can get it back to you. We can tell them it was a misunderstanding. I'll buy you a better house. I'll get you the best doctors. Just don't let them take me." "You're still bargaining," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "Even now, you think everything has a price. You think my dignity and my life can be bought back with the money you stole from me." "I'm your son," he screamed as the metal cuffs ratcheted shut around his wrists. The sound was sharp, final, and cold. "My son died the moment he closed that door on me yesterday," I told him. I watched as they led him out of the house. He struggled, shouting profanities, blaming the world, blaming the economy, blaming me. He looked back one last time as they pushed him into the back of the squad car. In that moment, I didn't see a CEO. I didn't see a businessman. I saw a hollow shell of a person who had traded his soul for a temporary throne. I stood in the center of the foyer, the house suddenly echoing with a profound silence. Silas walked in, standing beside me. He didn't say anything. He just put a hand on my shoulder. "You got it back, Arthur," Silas whispered. "The injunction is signed. The house is yours again." I looked up the stairs toward the bedrooms. The house was mine, yes. But the warmth was gone. The betrayal had left a stain on the wallpaper and a chill in the floorboards that no heater could ever fix. I had won the battle, but the landscape of my life had been scorched. "It's just a building, Silas," I said, my voice heavy with the weight of 71 years. For today was the day after my birthday, and I felt every second of it. "It's just a building, but at least now I can decide who walks through the door." I walked to the kitchen and turned on the kettle. My hands were finally still. The storm had passed, but the world was different now. I was a man with a house, a man with his name back. But I was also a man who had to learn how to live in the silence of a broken heart. The weeks following the arrest were a whirlwind of legal filings, depositions, and the cold, clinical dissection of my family's history. The house was mine again, but it felt like a museum dedicated to a life that had been sabotaged. Every time I turned a corner, I expected to see the ghost of the son I thought I knew. But all I found were the remnants of his greed. Empty folders, hidden ledgers, and the lingering scent of his expensive cologne. Julian didn't go down without a fight. From behind the glass of the county jail, he hired a high-priced defense attorney who specialized in family mediation and asset disputes. Suddenly, the narrative began to shift in the local tabloids. Stories appeared suggesting that I was suffering from early-onset dementia and that Julian had been acting as a concerned guardian who had simply moved too fast in his zeal to protect the family estate. One afternoon, Silas came over with a stack of papers. He looked tired, but his eyes remained sharp. "They're going for the diminished capacity defense, Arthur. They want to argue that you didn't understand the documents you signed and that Julian was merely consolidating assets to pay for your long-term care. They're even trying to paint the eviction as a misunderstanding, claiming he had arranged a luxury suite for you and the taxi driver simply took you to the wrong address." The wrong address? I felt a surge of cold fury. "He threw my bags into the gutter, Silas. He watched me stand in the rain. There is no misunderstanding. That includes a father sleeping on a shelter floor while his son drinks 30-year-old scotch." "I know that, and you know that," Silas said. "But in a courtroom, they play to the emotions of a jury. They want to make you look like a confused old man who has turned on his only son out of spite. They've requested a meeting, a settlement conference. Julian wants to speak to you directly." "No," I said instantly. "Hear me out," Silas countered. "The district attorney thinks this is a good idea. If he tries to manipulate you or slip up in his story, we have it on record. It's a chance to see his hand before we go to trial. And more importantly, Arthur, it's a chance for you to see him for what he really is, without the lights and the parties." The meeting took place in a sterile, gray room at the courthouse. Julian sat across from me, stripped of his designer suit and wearing the rough orange fabric of the inmate uniform. He looked thinner, his hair unkempt, the shadow of a beard darkening his jaw. For a moment, my heart twinged. It was the primal instinct of a father to want to protect his child from suffering. But then, I looked at his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a repentant son. They were the eyes of a gambler, looking for one last card to play. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking with a practiced tremor. "I'm so sorry. I've had a lot of time to think in here. I was under so much pressure. The business was failing. I was being threatened. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought if I could just get the house sold, I could fix everything and then bring you home to a penthouse. I never meant for you to end up in that shelter. I thought the car was taking you to the Ritz." "The Ritz doesn't take prepaid vouchers for the St. Jude's mission, Julian," I said flatly. "It was a mistake, a clerical error by Sarah," he shouted, then quickly lowered his voice as his lawyer tapped his arm. "Dad, please. If this goes to trial, I'm looking at 10 years. I won't survive 10 years in a place like this." Think of Mom. Would she want this? Would she want her only son to rot in a cell because of a financial dispute? "Don't you dare speak for your mother," I whispered, leaning across the table. "Your mother died thinking she had raised a man of honor. If she saw you now, if she saw what you did to the home she loved, she wouldn't recognize you. You didn't just steal money, Julian. You stole the safety of my memories." "I'll give it all back," he promised, his hands shaking. "I have a hidden account, something the DA hasn't found yet. It's enough for you to live like a king for the rest of your life. Just tell them you made a mistake. Tell them the deed transfer was a gift. I'll sign a confession for the mismanagement, but the criminal charges will vanish. We can be a family again." I looked at him and felt a profound sense of pity, but not the kind he wanted. I pitied the fact that, even in orange jumpsuits, he still didn't understand what he had lost. He thought he could still buy my love with a hidden account. He thought family was a contract that could be renegotiated when the terms became unfavorable. "You're right about one thing, Julian. I said, standing up. I am 70 years old. I don't have many years left, and I refuse to spend a single one of them living a lie for your sake. You talk about 10 years like it's a lifetime. I gave you 30 years of my life, my sweat, and my heart, and you threw it all away for a property deal. Dad, don't walk out, he screamed as I turned toward the door. You're killing me. You're the one committing the crime now. You're destroying your own son. I didn't look back. I walked out of that room and into the bright, harsh sunlight of the afternoon. Silas was waiting for me. How was it? He asked. It was quiet, I replied, because for the first time in my life, I couldn't hear his voice anymore. I only heard the wind. The settlement was rejected. The DA moved forward with the full weight of the evidence Sarah Jenkins had provided. The hidden account Julian had mentioned. It was real, but it wasn't a gift. It was the final piece of evidence we needed to prove premeditated money laundering. By trying to bribe me, Julian had handed us the rope he would eventually hang himself with in court. As the trial date approached, I realized that the battle was no longer about the house or the money. It was about the truth. The world needed to know that age does not equal weakness, and that the bond of blood is not a license to bleed someone dry. Julian had counted on my silence. He was about to find out that I had a lot more to say. The courtroom was a cathedral of cold marble and echoing whispers. For 3 weeks I sat in the front row, watching my life being laid bare. I watched as forensic accountants traced the jagged lines of my stolen savings across giant screens. I watched Sarah Jenkins take the stand, her voice trembling as she recounted the threats Julian had used to force her hand. And finally, I watched my son take the stand in his own defense. He was a different man than the one who had thrown me out. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a calculated, soft-spoken humility designed to sway the jury. He spoke of business pressures, of mental lapses, and of a deeply complicated relationship with a father who was losing his grip on reality. He looked at the jury with tears in his eyes, painting himself as a tragic figure caught in a whirlwind of circumstance. I loved my father, Julian said, his voice cracking perfectly on cue. I still love him. Everything I did, however misguided, was to ensure that the Bennett legacy would survive the financial storm I was facing. I thought I was protecting him from the creditors. I thought I was securing his future. The defense attorney turned to me, his eyes sharp. Mr. Bennett, isn't it true that you've had lapses in memory over the last year? Isn't it true that you often ask Julian to handle the heavy lifting of your finances because you found them too confusing? I stood up to take the stand for my rebuttal. The room went silent. I didn't look at the jury, and I didn't look at the cameras. I looked straight at Julian. I found the numbers confusing, yes, I said, my voice steady and clear, because I didn't realize that when a son looks at his father, he should see a human being, not a balance sheet. You say you were protecting me? You protect a father by holding his hand, Julian, not by changing the locks. You protect a legacy by living with honor, not by forging signatures in the dark. I reached into the folder Silas had prepared. You mentioned the financial storm, but the records show that while you were telling me we were broke, you were buying a villa in the Caymans under the Apex name. While I was eating oatmeal in a shelter, you were wiring $200,000 to a luxury car dealership for a vehicle you didn't need. This wasn't a rescue mission, Julian. It was a liquidation. The jury's deliberation took less than 4 hours. When the foreman stood up, the air in the room seemed to vanish. On the count of first-degree grand theft, guilty. On the count of elder financial abuse, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit deed fraud, guilty. Julian didn't scream this time. He just slumped forward, his forehead touching the defense table. It was the posture of a man who had finally run out of lies. The judge, a woman who had seen 1,000 tragedies, looked down at him with a gaze that held no mercy. Julian Bennett, "You have violated the most sacred trust that exists in our society," she said. "You targeted the person who gave you life because you viewed his years of hard work as your shortcut to wealth. The law provides for a maximum sentence, and in this case I find no reason for leniency." The sentence was 12 years in a maximum security state prison. As the bailiffs moved in to take him away, Julian looked back at me. For a split second, I saw the boy again, the one who was afraid of the dark. But the boy was buried under layers of greed that I could no longer reach. "Dad," he mouthed, a final plea. I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head. I simply watched him go. After the courtroom cleared, Diane, Sterling, and Silas walked me to the steps of the courthouse. The sun was setting, casting long purple shadows across the city. "It's over, Arthur," Diane said, shaking my hand. "The house is legally yours and the court has ordered the seizure of the offshore accounts. You'll be repaid every cent with interest. You can live wherever you want now. You can travel. You can start over." "Thank you, Diane," I said. "And thank you, Silas. You saved more than just my house." Silas smiled, a genuine, warm expression. "I didn't save you, Arthur. You saved yourself. Most people in your position would have stayed in that shelter and let the world forget them. You chose to be the light that exposed the rot." I walked back to my car. The car Julian had tried to take, now returned to me. I drove back to the old neighborhood, through the gates and up the winding driveway. The "for sale" sign was gone. The grass was a bit overgrown and the roses needed pruning. I walked up to the front door. I pulled out my key, the new one I'd had made. I turned the lock and stepped inside. The house was quiet. No investors, no music, no shouting, just the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea. I sat in my chair, the one by the window. I looked at the photo of Martha on the mantel. I had my assets back. I had my dignity. I had my freedom. But as the moon rose over the garden, I realized that the greatest gift Julian had given me on my 70th birthday wasn't the eviction. It was the realization that time is the only currency that truly matters, and I wasn't going to waste another second of mine on a ghost. The dust has finally settled on the battlefield of my life. A year has passed since that rainy night when I stood on the sidewalk with nothing but my name and a broken heart. Today the house is quiet, but it is no longer empty. It is filled with a different kind of life. I didn't sell it as Silas suggested I might. Instead, I turned the upper floor into a sanctuary for others who have faced the same betrayal. A transition home for elders who found themselves discarded by the families they spent their lives building. I spend my mornings in the garden. The same garden Julian tried to pave over for a developer's profit. The roses are blooming with a fierce, vibrant red, and the oak tree, where Martha's spirit lingers, seems taller, stronger. I've realized that 70 isn't the end of the book. It's just the beginning of the most honest chapter, without the weight of Julian's expectations and the burden of his secrets. I am lighter than I have been in decades. Julian is still serving his sentence. I receive letters from him occasionally, envelopes with the prison stamp that I keep in a drawer, unopened. Perhaps one day I will have the strength to read them, to see if the concrete walls have managed to do what my love couldn't. Teach him the value of a soul. But for now, I choose peace over closure. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't always mean letting someone back into your life. Sometimes it just means letting go of the anger so you don't drown in it. Silas is a frequent guest here. He's no longer the man I met in the shelter with the tattered book. With the help of the settlement funds from the bank that allowed the fraudulent transfers, we opened a legal clinic specifically for elder advocacy. He's back in his suit, his mind as sharp as a razor, fighting for those who don't have a voice. We often sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset. Two men who were once discarded by the world, now building a new one. People often ask me how I survived it. How do you look at the child you held in your arms and accept that they tried to destroy you? My answer is always the same. You look at the mirror, not the shadow. Julian was the shadow. but I was the light that cast it. As long as I am standing, the light remains. Being 70 means I have seen enough storms to know that the sun always returns, provided you are willing to wait for the morning. The Bennett name no longer belongs to Julian's failed firm or his offshore accounts. It belongs to the foundation we've built. It belongs to the laughter of the residents who now share this house with me. People who understand that family isn't always about blood. It's about the hands that reach out to catch you when you fall. We have created a family of choice, a brotherhood of survivors who refuse to be defined by the cruelty of others. As I sit here today, looking out at the neighborhood that once turned its back on me, I feel no bitterness. I feel only a profound sense of gratitude for the strength I didn't know I had. I have my home, I have my dignity, and most importantly, I have my truth. I am Arthur Bennett. I am 71 years old, and I am just getting started. The story of the 70th birthday gift wasn't a story of a son who won. It was a story of a father who refused to lose. It's a reminder that no matter how old you are, or how deep the betrayal goes, you are never too old to stand up and reclaim your life. The walls of your home may be made of brick and mortar, but the foundation of your spirit, is something no one can ever truly take away unless you let them. To anyone out there sitting in the dark, wondering if it's too late to fight back, look at me. I was on the street with 4 broken suitcases and a ruined suit. Today, I am the master of my own fate. The road to justice is long and often cold, but it leads to a sunrise more beautiful than any you've ever seen. Keep walking, keep fighting. Your story isn't over yet. Thank you for joining us for this emotional journey on Dr. Harmony. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the strength of the human spirit, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell. Your support helps us share more stories of resilience and justice. Don't forget to like and share this video. It helps others find the courage to speak their truth. Until next time, stay strong and take care of one another.